RI4 RI5 Text Structure is a combined target related to how ideas are connected within a text. As with some of our other targets, this one has applications in the real world. In order to fully understand anyone's message, be it spoken or written, you really will need to understand how they are placing their ideas in relation to one another. Is it cause and effect? If so, is it actually a trustworthy cause and effect? Understanding these things can help us make better decisions when it comes to things like voting or signing a contract. And looking at the actual target, we're going to start at the 3-level proficiency. This particular target asks that you analyze, in other words, break apart how specific individuals, ideas, or events, and in our case it's mostly going to be ideas, interact and develop over the course of the text, and also evaluate the effectiveness of the structure an author uses in his or her exposition or argument, including whether the structure makes points clear, convincing, and engaging. So we're looking for several different features as far as our evaluation or how effective the piece happens to be. At the 2 level, you can do those things, but you give limited detail. So you might only give 1 to 2 details when you are justifying your response. And at the 1 level, you can give some kind of analysis. In other words, you can tell me how the ideas are placed together, and you can give a general evaluation, whether or not it's good or bad, but you don't give any proof. Okay? There's no specific details, so no proof. At the 4 level, you can conduct your analysis and evaluation in depth. In other words, you're going to give me a close reading with very specific details to support your response. Okay? Now we're talking about text structure, we're really talking about organization of a piece. Just as you organize your own written pieces, other authors have organized theirs. And there are a couple of different ways of going about doing that, which we're going to be looking at. We'll start with this particular list. This is all that you'll be expected to look for in your analysis of texts that are provided to you. There are other patterns of organization out there, but these are the most common. So we'll be covering chronological order, list of items, compare, contrast, cause, effect, definition and example, order of importance, which is the one that you have most used in the past, and problem and solution. As we're going through each pattern of organization, you want to make special note of the transition words that are listed with each pattern. These are the words that will help you identify what is being used in the text that we are studying. Chronological order is our first pattern of organization. In chronological order, ideas are presented in the order in which they occurred. Most often seen in historical writings, any writing that's detailing an event that has occurred in the past is likely going to be in chronological order. It answers the questions, when did it happen and in what order? A thesis example, between now and the election, the candidate will make a number of campaign stops throughout the nation. This is setting up an essay or an article, if you will, to talk about what each of those stops will be and in the order in which they'll happen. Transition words that you might see will all relate to time. So first, second, third, then, finally, eventually, following this, before, after. Those are the types of transition words to be on the lookout. Of course, there are going to be more than what I've just mentioned, but anything that relates to time would be a gain transition word for this particular piece. Now, when you're talking about evaluation, is it effective? Something to consider for chronological order is, do they actually list the events in chronological order? If an author mixes up their events, they don't have the dates correct, that would be a place where you might say, this is not an effective use of chronological order. List of items is a pretty straightforward organizational strategy. Information is simply listed by item, fact, reason, example, feature, or characteristics. It primarily answers the questions, what examples support the main idea? What proof is there? So if you see a piece that's just listing a lot of proof or a lot of examples, do check closely for a list of items. But you'll want to be careful with this one and make sure that it's also not order of importance, ending with the most important, because those two are often confused. Thesis example here, managers experience a number of personnel problems that must be solved before a department can work effectively. An essay based on this thesis would go on to list each personnel problem that might need to be addressed, and so long as they didn't end with what was most important or most critical, we could call it a list of items. Transition words will relate to adding on examples or other information, so transitions like and, to, in addition, moreover, and so on this particular list would be words that you would want to watch out for as signal words for the list of items. Now, if you believe that a text is list of items, the evaluation is actually going to be very straightforward. List of items, although a valid organizational strategy, is not the best organizational strategy out there. In fact, order of importance is much preferred. You want to leave your reader with what is most important, and so if they could have done that, then they should have. And so if you see it as list of items, you can say, this isn't really all that effective because it is list of items, and there are better organizational strategies available to use. Compare contrast deals with talking about how organization is both similar, or how information is both similar and different between two or more items or topics. Now the key here with compare contrast when you're doing an evaluation is that they really should talk about both similarities and differences, not just one or the other. If they only talk about one, then you could say that's not a very effective piece. They should cover both. Thesis example, gangs and fraternities share many characteristics but are quite different. You could have a paragraph talking about how they're similar and a paragraph talking about how they're different, and an essay to follow this thesis. Transition words should deal with both similarities and differences, so similarly, like, the same as some examples of similarity transitions, but yet, on the other hand, some examples of how you might indicate difference in transitions. Cause and effect is a very common organizational strategy in the text that we are going to be looking at in particular, because we're looking at a lot of historically important documents. So you might want to star this one. It'll be a common one that you'll see. In a cause and effect, the pattern describes or discusses an event or action that is caused by another event or action. It answers the questions, why did something happen and what were the results? A thesis example, research has shown that birth defects have various causes. It could talk about the different birth defects and what caused each one. Transition words, people always overlook this one because it has cause right in it. That's a transition word for cause and effect. For this reason, due to, cause itself can be a transition word. On account of, then this as a result, anything dealing with results. Since, consequently, therefore, thus, in effect, resulting, and more than that. Do keep a close eye out for that because, though, it's quite common and often overlooked. For cause and effect, when you're considering evaluation purposes, make sure that the cause and effect, or causes and effects listed, are actually lined up with one another. It is often the case that authors will attribute a cause to some event that has happened that wasn't really the cause of it. So make sure it's a logical connection and that, in fact, it really was the true cause for the event or effect. Definition and example is another very straightforward organizational pattern. A word or a concept is introduced and then explained or described, usually with an example. If it doesn't have an example, then that's a really good way to simply evaluate a text and say, hey, they gave a definition, but they didn't give an example. Examples are very helpful for humans to understand a text. Without them, a text is not nearly as effective. It answers the question, what is it? A thesis example, ragtime music is a style that developed at the turn of the 20th century, played primarily by piano. An essay based on this could go on to talk more about how it developed at that particular time period and how the instrument helped develop it. Transition words, define as, and if you see define, that's kind of a key there. Known, the term means, is stated as, is used to mean for example, because we have to give examples in this particular piece, to illustrate, for instance, such as. And two, I mean, this is an often overlooked one, but just that basic verb is can be a huge keyword there. Order of importance, as I mentioned earlier, this one connects closely to a list of items. When you're doing an evaluation, order of importance is a very effective strategy because it leaves your reader with the most important event at the last body paragraph or even into their conclusion. So it's a pretty strong organizational strategy to use. If you are doing an evaluation of it, you might make sure that they have in fact ended with what is most important. If you think there's any reason to say something else they included is more important than what they ended with, that could be your evaluation. In order of importance, the information is ordered from least to most important. It must end with most important. Question answered, which point is the most to least important? Which element is crucial? Okay. Thesis example, while the most basic need is physiological or physical, workers aspire to self-actualization as their most valued need. Transition words, if we're talking about what is important, then we're looking at words like central or principal, chief, major, main, key, primary, significant, finally, lastly. And these would be the types of words that you'd see toward the end of the essay, so keep an eye out there. Problem and solution is another one that you should star. It's a very common organizational strategy in the text that we're studying. A problem is presented and explained, a solution is proposed. Now, sometimes you might only see the problem, or you might only see a solution with a problem very lightly explained. In both of those cases, you could say this is not an effective text. It's always best to give your reader all of the information as thoroughly as possible. So if they're not giving a full problem and a full solution, tell them so. Say, hey, that's not effective. You should be bulking up your problem and or your solution. Thesis example, since pollution has a detrimental impact on modern living standards, there's our problem. A key solution is increased recycling of waste products. Transition words would relate to problem or solutions. Problem, need, difficulty, dilemma, enigma, challenge. Enigma is a mystery, by the way. It's a great word. Issue, answer, proposal, suggestion, solve, and of course, don't forget things basically like solution. Now, I hate to tell you this, it's the ugly truth. In the real world, many texts and people talking will contain sections and passages that combine two or more patterns of organization. It's normal, it's acceptable. When you're doing your analysis, though, don't tell me it's mixed. Tell me which are being used. Okay, so if it's both problem, solution, and cause and effect, I want to see both of those labels on there, not simply that it's mixed. Now, how are you going to go about finding all these lovely patterns of organization? Well, the first step, you're going to laugh at this, but read the text. Sometimes people try and just skip over that step and just skim for those keywords. You've got to make sure you understand the full text. So read it first, then identify which structure is used. And here's really where you want to watch for those transitions. Ask yourself what questions are being answered. Okay, do some thought on that one. And look at the whole text too, okay, when you're trying to figure out which one is being used. Make your decision as to what you think it is, and then verify compared against the whole text. Once you've done that, you need to analyze how the structure is used, and this is simply where you're going to list the clues that helped you find it. Okay? So you look for the transitions and the questions and the whole text while you're trying to identify it. Once you believe you've got the answer, then you're actually going to list those in your response. Be as specific as possible. If you want to get that 4 for this target, you need to go in depth. I need to see the quotes that helped you identify what it was. Finally, you need to evaluate. Is the organization logical? I've given you some tips on each of the structures as we've gone through, so make sure you can answer those questions. Does the organization help the reader find the important information? The answer there should be yes. If it's no, then it was not the logical choice. You could suggest what would be more logical, or you can tell me why it was hard to follow. A quick tip, and this is true for any of the targets that we're studying, you're going to have an easier time doing analysis if you can take some notes on each paragraph as you read through. Please make sure that you're doing that.